for the French Revolution and talk about the Ancien, I don't know. I think it's Ancien, but I don't know French, so hey, regime. And basically, what we're going to talk about today is kind of like what the society was like in France that leads up to the revolution and then like the breaking of the revolution, okay? So in France, we basically have this division of three broad-based social groups, okay? The first, second, and third estate. Third estate's going to be on the next page here. And to give you an idea, on the right, the first and second estate are sitting on the back of the third estate, so that should give you an idea of what life was like. Okay, so what do we got here? The first estate was basically, well, they were the clergy. There were about 130,000 of them. They owned 10% of all of the land. They were exempted from taxes, although technically they were going to give like voluntary taxes every 5 years. I don't know how much that was done. And within themselves a little bit, they had some divisions because the parish priests were like commoners and stuff like that, but like the bishops and cardinals, they were all noblemen or had been noblemen, so there was a little division there, but they had it pretty good in France, and there was like 9 of them, okay? The second estate is a little bit bigger. This is your nobility. There was about 350,000 or so people on this. They owned 25 to 30% of the land, so 40% of the land is owned by the nobles and the clergy. You have a smidge of land owned by commoners, and then the rest belongs to the crown. So now these guys were in charge of a lot of things, and they had a crucial role in French society. So what was their impact? Well, they were the biggest owners of manufacturing and industry. They ran a lot of the trade. They had the highest positions in the government, in the military, in the church, in the courts, particularly with judges here, okay? Now, they were kind of broad-based into 2 divisions, okay? You had the nobles of the robe. They were the ones that were in, like, the government and were, like, the judges, okay? And the nobles of the sword, they were ones that claimed descent from, like, medieval knights and stuff like that, and they were in the military, and basically they wanted to, keep their super big privileges up, and the key privileges for the second estate was, like, they paid no taxes. So they would only intermarry between themselves. They wouldn't pay any taxes. They were kind of like very elitist, nose up at everybody, and, they would cause some problems for the king as well, which we'll get to. The third estate was everybody else, okay? There were millions of them here. Now, I have here land and legacies of serfdom. Here's the deal. Most people owned no land, and if you did own land, you owned a very little bit of it. And the legacies of serfdom were still there because, okay, technically there's no serfs, but I mean, people really didn't have a lot of rights. They couldn't move around a lot. They were often controlled by landlords. They paid like a stupid amount of taxes. They had to pay 10% to the church. They paid their taxes to the federal government. Then they had to pay like extra taxes to use like communal ovens and flour mills and wine presses. It was pretty terrible. And economically, there were some major issues. I have their wages, housing, and food. Well, there's a big boom in population in the 16 and the 1700s, and the problem is there are not necessarily enough jobs for that, and in general, wages were kept depressed by the people in power because you don't want folks getting, too much in the way of money because then they could challenge you, so we're going to keep your wages down, and then we're going to make it basically so you have to spend all your wages on housing. Just in the city of Paris itself, throughout the entirety of the 18th century, from the beginning to the end, housing costs went up about 140%, and you can bet your money that wages did not go up that high. So now we have to spend a ton of money on that, and then we also have to spend a ton of money on food. And we will see throughout the 1700s there will be various like little droughts and famines, and there'll be problems with food, and so food prices will spike, and the people will riot. They're called bread riots. It's going to get pretty intense, and so in the third estate, you were kind of shafted. Now, there was a group that was growing, and here's a picture on the right of kind of like a French middle-class family in the 18th century. They're kind of chilling there. Yeah, they don't have all shoes on, but they're inside. It's totally okay. But, like, I want you to look around the picture. If you have to, in a minute, just, like, pause it, and I want you to look at the picture. Okay, so pause and look at the picture. Okay, so hopefully you were done pausing and then you took a look at the picture, and you want to look at some things. They have enough money where they have some like paintings up here, right? You have multiple rooms. Like, that's craziness here. Okay, the kids are all, they have variety of clothing. It doesn't look in tatters. It actually looks in good shape. I mean, they have a cat. All right, I'd have allergies, but they clearly don't. This little girl's chilling, so life's actually pretty good. And technically, the middle class was part of the third estate, but they were growing. Okay, and these were people that were like lawyers and doctors and low-level government employees and merchants and early industrialists and some like smaller bankers and things were going pretty good and they were actually starting to make money and if they have money that means they're going to have a little bit of a say, and in fact they're going to have a say because they really don't like the fact they're very dissatisfied with this idea that you know they can't they get taxes and there's no voting and they can't really do a lot, not because they don't have money, but just because they don't have a title, and a lot of them don't like that. Now, sometimes a really wealthy noble might be able to score a title, but so there's some social mobility. But in the end, it's not too good for them either. And so the major problem that we look at for France is basically like they're operating kind of like with this old, antiquated idea of a social structure, which doesn't give people lots of economic opportunity to move it up. People really don't have the ability to make their own decisions, which they don't like a lot. The system was very rigid. It's very discriminatory against anybody without a title. And then also this idea that food sometimes is going to be in short supply, and that is not a good thing. All right, so let's get to some more specific things. And then the monarchy and the king at the time, Louis XVI, well, he's got some issues. First issue are these philosophes, rabble-rousers that are talking about freedom and equality and all that nonsense. He doesn't like that. And then, actually, here's something interesting, though. Louis does recognize that sometimes maybe you throw a little bone to the commoners and they'll leave you alone. Well, there was this system in France, and I should have thrown a word up here, but I didn't. And there's an idea of a parlement and a parlement. A parlement, P-A-R-L-I-A, meant, is something that is like a government body, okay? A parlement, P-A-R-L-E-M-E-N-T. These are actually courts that were set up to make sure that the king wouldn't necessarily pass laws that would be too discriminatory against the people. The problem is that the king was actually debating and had passed or made some decrees that could help the commoners, but the parlements, who were given the ability to block these decrees, were actually all controlled by noblemen, so they wouldn't let them through. And the other problem with so you're not getting any reforms. No one really likes the king because he lives in this crazy palace and he dresses like absurdly. And no one likes his wife. We'll talk about it in class. You can ask a question. But they were broke. They fought in the 7 Years' War and that stunk. And then they helped us win the revolution. Yes, the French helped us win the revolution. We didn't bail them out later. These things happen. Sometimes you can't pay your buddy back. But France was basically in a tailspin. In 1788, half of the expenditures of the government was on their debt. And so they can't do anything. And so in the end, Louis is forced to call together the Estates General, and you see them on the bottom here. The Estates General is like that parliament body that was made up of representatives from each of the three estates, so like regular folks and religious folks and of course the nobility. And they were actually brought together because in the past they had existed in France, and their job was to deal with like monetary affairs and help with things like that. But it was also kind of seen as a weak move by the king because he couldn't get his ministers and couldn't create good financial programs to help bail France out. And so he calls this Estates General together. And this is what is actually going to cause the problem, because the Estates General, basically, they're consisted of those, representatives from the three estates. And the voting process was a little bit out of whack, and I'll explain that more I'll explain it now. So the idea was that each estate got representatives to the body of the Estates General based on the total population. So naturally, you would assume like, whoa, well then the Estates General would have, since they have 96% of the population, would have the most representatives. They do, but here it is, gang. This is not like our government. each estate only had one vote. So basically, all members of the estate would vote on something, and then the estate would um, cast their vote for some type of policy or economic expenditure, and it would only be one. So naturally, the first and second estate would do whatever they want. The third estate got shafted, and they were getting tired of it, and they were getting very frustrated, and everybody's yelling at each other, and then poor Spider-Man just has to sit there, and no one knows what's going to go on. Well, on June 17th, 1789, it all comes to a head. They had been arguing for days and days and days, and so on June 17th, they try to go into the council chambers, and they find themselves locked out, pretty much all the members of the third estate, because the first and the second estate are like, we're going to just do whatever we want. The third estate's like, oh no, we're not having any of this. And then comes an event known as the tennis court oath. It's fantastic. Basically what happens is the third estate can't find anywhere where they will actually are like allowed to meet, and so they're able to get themselves into an indoor tennis court. Okay, and that's what this is depicting. And on that tennis court, they are going to pledge an oath, and that oath is going to be to form a government that has a real constitution. Okay, and if you look on the bottom there, right in the middle. Okay, let me move the mouse. Woohoo! They're in this third estate is going to get a little bit of help from some priests, so from the first estate, and some nobles will see that, you know what, maybe we got it all work it out together. So we got a group hug. And what's going to do, they are going to create themselves or call themselves the National Assembly. So the third estate is gone, the National Assembly is formed, members from the other estates will join it, and again their overall goal is going to create a constitution that is accepted by Louis XVI. Louis, on the other hand, is like, well, I don't know if I really like this, and he actually threatens to dissolve the estates and actually like arrest a bunch of them and take military action. So that's not so good. And all that bickering is going back and forth until finally on July 17th, 1789, I'm sorry, not July 17th, July 14th, 1789, just about a month later, everything finally breaks. And the beginning of the French Revolution, some people will say it's, June 17th when the National Convention is formed, but they don't really do anything for a while. More people point to July 14th, 1789. It's basically when France goes bonkers. And in the city of Paris specifically, a huge mob decides to take over the Bastille prison. And of course, that's a painting that depicts it because the Bastille was actually burned down, so we don't have it anymore. The spot's there. I've been there. It was kind of cool. And so what ends up happening is that the Bastille is taken, and there were actually only like 2 people in it, and most of the guards just kind of left anyway. But, it was the representation of everything about this power, that they could jail you and do whatever they want, and now we've burned it down. But here's the thing, there's no real order, like there's no organization, there's no leadership, there's no body that's actually in charge of anybody on a grand scale. And so what Louis is going to do is, in order to try to calm things down, he's going to dissolve his army. He's going to say, look, we have no more army. Regular people of the world, you people who are burning down the Bastille and stuff, I'm creating something called the National Guard because we have to calm things down. We have to do this in an orderly fashion. And the guy that I'm going to put in charge of it is the Marquis de Lafayette, okay, who we love, and especially the people in Hamilton love, and Davy Diggs was great, and all this fun stuff. But the fact of the matter is you've got the Marquis de Lafayette, who was a national hero, who was absolutely beloved, and Louis taps him because he can calm things down. But unfortunately, people really just start to freak out, and then they start to riot all over because, the start of this revolution is just like a bunch of people like burning stuff down and killing nobles and stuff, and that's not good. And basically from July 14th to August 3rd, 1789, you have I don't know, what's that? So 31, 17. So about 20 days, almost 3 weeks of basic destruction, where the common people go crazy, and something that is known as the Great Fear, because it becomes bandied about that the king is going to bring in the aristocracies of other nations, and they're going to come in and they're just going to like destroy all of the commoners. So they need to tear it all down before that can happen. And you get like these localized militias who are going to go out and arrest nobles and kill nobles. And as you can see the picture here, just like generalized chaos. And so that's the start of the revolution. It's not like with a battle, it's not with like a declaration. It is quite literally like this explosion, and it's going to follow a bunch of different forms, and we're going to get into it, okay? So make sure you get your assignments, and yeah, I'll see you the next time.